public transport so long as they present their company IDs.
Exempted po ang mga workers natin because they are rendering essential services. Pagtingin ko mo mga yan, paano gagalaw ang ating mga negosyo? Pag walang negosyo, walang ekonomiya.
The government is looking to tap pharmacies in Metro Manila to aid in administering booster shots. This move is part of a pilot study seeking to ramp up vaccinations across the country.
Itong mga pharmacies or butika, pati yung private clinic, will be implementing this together with LGUs. No? So yung LGUs, sa kanila po yung responsibility ng registration and documentation, while yung and then yung pharmacies naman will oversee the administration.
Workers can now use public transportation regardless of their COVID-19 vaccination status, as government also asked the private sector to provide paid isolation and quarantine leave to their employees affected by COVID-19. Meanwhile, government has tapped pharmacies and clinics to give COVID-19 booster shots. Will this fast-track the government's vaccination drive? We discuss in this episode of the Chiefs. It's the Tuesday edition of the Chiefs. I'm Ed Lingao. Also with us, Ana Marie Paminto of the Philippine Star, Lucy Guz Valdez, the head of News 5, and Robbie Alampay of One News. Robbie and ladies, good evening and happy Tuesday.
Happy Tuesday.
Happy Tuesday. Mababa ngayon, no, Ami? Mababa by about
it went below
9,000.
30,000.
Pero
But it's
accurate ba
Tuesday,
yun?
remember. Tuesday, the Tuesday, Wednesday.
Yeah, and the number of tests that came in was what? Lower than usual.
Yes.
Right.
Dumadami ang gumagamit ng antigen at dumadami din
marami.
nagtitinda ng antigen.
Oh
na
my.
walang ano.
Kaya Ed, mag-level up ka na. Huwag
Sabi
ka
na ako
dun
na
sa
naman
150 plus. Mag-invest ka. Hindi. Pero naglabas ng mga certified ng FDA. Para lang siguro may guide, pero hindi pa raw yun para sa mga self-administered.
So, tsaka release pa dyan sa guidelines na yan, yung reminder ni Health Undersecretary Vergere kahapon, di ba? Na sinabi niya, yung saliva test, least reliable. That's the least reliable.
Yeah.
Right.
Especially if you don't follow especially if you don't follow the instructions kasi you're supposed to take it before you even have anything to eat or brush your teeth early in the morning. Otherwise kasi you have so many other contaminants floating around. I know it doesn't sound good, but that complicates the variables that the test has to go through.
That's why I remember even sa Red Cross, remember when Chairman Dick Gordon was briefing us about the tests and they were starting to roll out the saliva test even to sa Red Cross. Ayun yung patakaran doon eh. There's a certain amount of time na
may
hindi ka
fasting.
pwedeng uminom, hindi ka pwedeng kumain.
Yes.
Ang tagal-tagal makipo nung ano.
Tsaka ang balita ko from friends, no, anecdotal, pero ang dami raw kailangang ipunin ng saliva. So, hindi rin daw siya ganun kadali. Kasi it's really hard nga naman to ano ba tawag to work up that much.
Ako, mag-test ako eh. It will take you about 5 minutes.
Matagal din eh.
Ang dami nun isang tingin yung gano'n ang hirap mag-ipo ng gano'n. Doon yun matagal na
Parang hindi naman mahirap.
Siguro,
Ang dami mo supply, Ed.
kaya hindi siya accurate siguro sa antigen ko konti. Pero para na siya maskara, nagkaalap talaga ngayon lahat ng klase.
Pero yung isa pag-uusapan natin mamaya, it's something that we kept asking din dito sa show natin at saka sa marami pang platforms, yung mga butika. The pharmacies are finally coming into play when it comes to testing. Dito lang sa amin siguro within a 500-meter radius, 4 yata yung butika around us, which a lot of people have been asking for a long time. Bakit
It's about time actually.
Diba?
Yeah. Oo. At saka ano na, di ba? Yung mga bakuna doon na rin gagawin in some drugstores, di ba?
Ito lang eh.
So, but
Ito
yeah,
lang
well,
eh.
but it's the start. It's
Yeah.
the
But
start.
however, they
no?
will have to make they will have to make
Yeah,
Ami.
marami kasi maliit ang lugar. Diba?
yeah, they will have to make
Kailangan-
physical arrangements eh. Like Ami said nga, maliit ang lugar. Most butikas kasi nakatayo ka lang and then they serve you over the counter. So walang physical space for for people to sit down and take a shot or take a test eh. So that does complicate things a little bit.
Sabay pa yung pila ng bayad, Jessic, paano na yan? Yung palang pila sa gamot, ang haba.
Meron pa ba?
Ang haba-haba.
Sabi nila okay na raw ah.
Ngayon, wala. Ang nagkakalat ngayon, yung fake vaccination cards and
Yan.
exemption cards.
Para
Na
sa no
fake
vaccine,
din,
no right,
diba?
no?
Wala namang ganun eh. Wala namang ganun.
Pero now
Pero
to add
madami.
a bit of complication to that problem of fake vaccination cards, may panibagong exemption naman ngayon.
I know, right?
na,
Yun sana ang pag-uusapan ngayon.
na medyo
We're
mahiwaga
just
kasi
waiting,
parang exemption pang kalawakan.
Sabi nga namin, sino pa bang mamamasahe? Di ba kung di yung nagtatrabaho? I mean, di ba? Let's just put it in percentages. Siguro, fully 90% ng mga sumasakay sa bus tsaka sa mga jeep on their way to work, right?
Yeah.
Or
Although,
on their way back from work.
There is also a certain logic to that you don't want people taking public transport just for leisure, to go to the mall or to go window shopping or to go partying.
Wala naman talaga.
At
Simula nang kumalat yung Omicron, walang
You never know. You know
Ghost
how
town nga
Filipinos
mga
are.
mall eh.
ang konti-konti
Ghost town
talaga.
mga mall. Yeah. Walang
Yeah.
laman ng mga mall.
So it does
Wala,
leave
kapalas
room
ko
for
lang eh.
complications eh.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, at least baka gusto niyo palang magpa-vaccinate sa Manila School. Yung mga mind lang naman and elderly.
Baka iba maturok sa'yo doon.
Tuloy na yung
Meron ba? May mga ganun ba?
Meron. Ang problema, hindi ba nahahawa mga animals sa they can be infected with COVID, ha? So,
Yes.
mga lugar doon eh.
Oo, may mga...
Ko isa swab test mo si Mali, paano?
Sa Manila Zoo pa naman, may unggoy doon na nanunura eh. So,
Si Peter. Buhay pa ba yun?
So, delikado.
Kilala ko si Peter eh. Naduraan ako nun eh. Kaya hindi ko makalimutan pangalan niya eh.
baka dudura-dura ka. Gusto mong saliva test?
Magaling mag-ipon yun.
Guys, we just have to go into a quick break while they make arrangements for our first guest tonight. So we'll just go into a break. Stay with us. Welcome back to Chiefs on One News. And now joining us is Labor Undersecretary Ana Dominic Tutay or Asik Tutay. Ma'am, Yusek Tutay, maraming salamat for joining us tonight and welcome back to Chiefs.
Yes, good evening everyone and to all the televiewers out there. Assistant Secretary po, not Undersecretary.
Ma'am, okay na
Thank
yung
you.
Yusek. Binawin niyo.
Wala na ba yan?
Salamat po sa promotion.
Ma'am, walang kasamang increase yun sa sweldo eh. So anyway, ma'am, well, certainly good news today coming from Labor Secretary Bello na may exemption for workers dun sa no vaccine, no ride policy. However, we need to have some clarification po kasi, of course, sabi ni Secretary Bello, all you have to do is present your company ID. Which sounds good. Pero ang problema, of course, is that a bigger chunk of the labor force belong to the informal sector. Yung mga walang ID, yung hindi po nagtatrabaho sa kumpanya o sa pabrika o hindi regular, yun po yung malaki-laki.
Yep.
So ano pong patakaran? Is it for all workers, formal or informal, and what do they need to bring?
Yeah, when the Secretary said that workers in essential activities or establishments can go out even without po presenting yung kanilang mga vaccination cards.
Ay, ma'am, sorry, ma'am, workers in essential establishments lang.
Essential workers. So basically, that's formal and informal. I have to correct that po. Because you are right, a big chunk of our workers naman po are also in the informal sector. So for those in the formal sector, they can present po yung kanilang mga company IDs or kung meron po silang mga employment contracts that they can show. But of course, company ID po ay very vital po yun. For the informal sectors po, meron naman po yan silang mga identification coming from the barangay. Lalong-lalo na po, halimbawa kung yan ay mga members ng mga association of certain groups of informal sector, then they can always show that naman din po.
Ma'am, Asek, linawin ko lang po, is this new policy or are we just clarifying something, an exemption that existed matagal na?
I think meron lang pong miscommunication doon sa na-release na information about it, and therefore I think just today Secretary Bello clarified that in his so many interviews, in a number of interviews po. So sinabi niya po yon na ang mga workers po ay exempted po doon sa pulisiya ng DOTR.
Asek, linawin lang natin ano yung essential sectors kasi narinig ko kanina si Biran, sabi niya, ang dami-dami niyang worker na yan, medyo mahirap. Ano namin malalaman kung alin niyang, and they are the majority of people taking public transportation. Ano ba yung essential sectors na yon?
Now that we are in alert level 3, meron po tayong mga certain sectors na pinapayagan although on a limited capacity. So kasama na po dyan halimbawa yung sa wholesale and retail services. Of course, the health sector, yun pong ating administrative and support service sectors. Practically almost all sectors except under level 3 po kasi di ba merong mga hindi pinapayagan, gaya po ng mga maliliit halimbawa na we call that other services, which means ito yung mga maliliit halimbawa yung mga salon, yung mga gym, lahat po ng close under alert level 3 as identified by the DTI. Syempre yun po ang hindi po pwede kasi paano naman po papasok yung mga manggagawa doon kung hindi naman po pinapayagan na mag-operate ang mga establishments na ito.
So yung mga restaurant, mga hotel, kasama
pwede po yun.
Pwede sila.
Yes po.
Okay.
So, ma'am, just to be clear, hindi po lahat bale, hindi lahat ng workers. Just to be clear po, hindi po lahat ng workers exempted. Talagang meron lamang sektor sa workforce.
For workers po who are allowed to operate in establishments under alert level 3, regardless po kung ang kanila pong tawag dito, yung allowable number of capacity nila ay allowed. Yan.
Okay. So,
Kasi
so
technically may mga sarado po tayong ngayon. May mga sarado po tayong businesses.
But Asek, I know enforcement is not necessarily anymore sa purview ng Department of Labor. But people, we do have to ask this because even prior to this clarification, ang complaint na kaagad ng transport sector and everybody really was that this is so unwieldy. Ang hirap nito i-enforce, lalo na binibigay pa ngayon yung burden sa mga jeepney drivers, sa mga bus drivers, and so on. And with this exception, as you said, practically all industries that are allowed, practically all workers are essentially allowed. I'm just being honest here. Are we essentially saying that actually wala nang enforcement to it? The reality is nobody will have the capacity to even be checking kapon. Vaccine cards lang i-check. Ngayon, i-check mo pa kung anong sektor ka nagtatrabaho.
Opo, actually medyo mahirap po ito on the part of the enforcers po natin kasi sa dami ng sector, we have 18 major sectors and then yung mga subsectors pa po niyan. Kailangang alamin. Siyempre, ang ordinaryo po na driver halimbawa, hindi naman niya alam kung ano-anong mga sektor yung pinag-uusapan sa ating ekonomiya na pinapayagan po. And yung mga commuters po, yung mga workers po natin, talagang narinig rin po namin na nagsasabi sila na ang hirap po nga sumakay ngayon kahit tayo ay nasa alert level 3 na supposedly medyo maluwag pa rin yan, but they really find it hard going to their work because of this issue po.
wala po bang stand si Secretary Berrio halimbawa on this no vax no ride? Na-express na rin po ba niya nga yung sabihin na natin, no, the unenforceability, kung tutusin, the practical unenforceability of such an order. Ano pong stand niya dyan? And wala bang pwedeng maisip ang DOLE a bit ng isang mas magandang paraan, a better way to incentivize or just encourage vaccination?
Opo. I think when the policy was set po, it's in an IATF meeting and all the cabinet members ng IATF po ay nandoon naman. Kaya minabuti po ng ating kalihim na ipinaglaban niya rin po yung mga workers na dapat exempted po sa ganitong mga polisiya dahil alam po ng ating kalihim na mahihirapan po talaga yung ating mga manggagawa. And siguro po, yung sa sinasabi po ninyo, ang lahat naman po ng mga polisiya, it's really open for una, suggestions, pangalawa, review, depending on the turnout of the enforcement. But I think the reason behind this policy is, of course, to protect everyone dito po sa surge ng COVID-19.
Asek, linawin ko lang po, I mean, follow up lang po doon sa tanong ko kanina. As we said, the enforcement is not your purview. But in the guidelines and the policies for the enforcement, a lot of the burden is put on drivers and operators. Now, that is in the purview of the Department of Labor. Is that fair? I mean, how do you take up the cudgels as well for yung mga driver, mga tsuper, pagkatapos sila pa ngayon ang mape-penalize kung malusutan sila?
Opo. Actually, sir, I'm not really privy to how the policy was set. Even siguro yung nitty-gritty of the enforcement of this policy. But yun din pong pagdating kasi sir sa transport sector, well, yes, totoo na sila rin naman po ay nasa hanay din ng mga manggagawa. But yung pagre-regulate po sa kanila is within the purview of the DOTR. Gusto naman ho natin na makita rin muna kung ano ang kalalabasan nitong enforcement na ginagawa po ng iba't ibang ahensya under the DOTR. And I'm very sure po that given yung mga reklamo na naririnig po natin, ay I'm sure pwedeng reviewin po yung kasalukuyang policy. Pero ang pakiusap siguro po natin sa ngayon ay bigyan din po muna natin ng pagkakataon dahil ito naman ay bago pa lang na na-implement po.
Kasi klinaro din ni Secretary Bello kanina na kahit dapat daw pasakayin kahit nakaka-1 dose pa lang. Ang ini-enforce ng mga transport enforcers gusto nila 2 doses. Ano ba talaga yung rule doon?
Opo, yun kasing level of protection, Ma'am Ami, ang tinitingnan din siguro ng ating mga enforcers. But of course, when you are receiving your first dose, mas mabuti na po yun kesa sa walang bakuna at all. So, ibig sabihin lamang po, maaaring kung naka-first dose, nag-aantay lang po yan ng kanyang schedule ng second dose. So, ang view po namin dyan is payagan po natin kasi meron naman pong effort on the part of the worker na talagang magpabakuna po siya at mabigyan po ng protection ang kanyang sarili.
Yun ang view ninyo. Pero ano yung rule? Kasi halimbawa sa Quezon City, yung hindi pa nakaka-second dose na gustong sumakay, sinama na lang nila doon sa bakunahan para makakuha na ng second dose. Meaning there is really such a rule.
Mukhang kailangang reviewin din po yun kasi kung halimbawa naka-first dose siya at ang schedule po niya is hindi pa naman talaga dapat siya magpa-second dose. Tapos, di ba, dadalhin mo doon? Parang napaka-impractical naman po. Supposedly, a policy should be implemented in such a way na maayos po yung buhay ng ating mga kliyente to which the policy is intended for. So, sana ho, on the part of the enforcers, medyo tingnan ho natin on the practical side yung polisiya po na ini-implement din po natin.
Kaakibat po niyan, paano po kaya kung ang isang worker nga, alimbawa, nag-first dose na or hindi pa bakunado, sabihin na lang natin, pero nagbabalak ng magpabakuna, paano po yun, makakount ba against his sick leave or vacation leave? In other words, makakaawas sa maaaring kitain niya or ma-earn niya dun sa oras na yun na nga, kung ngayon napipilitan na siya magpabakuna at gusto na niya magpabakuna, pero that will take time nga bago siya makapagpabakuna. Paano po kaya yun?
Okay, unang-una po, doon consideration. Pangalawa po, meron po kaming mga vaccination drive na nilulunsad po together with the private establishments. And in that activities po, bayad po ang ating mga manggagawa kahit sila po ay wala po sa opisina o sa pagawaan dahil sila po ay nagpapabakuna. Minsan po, binibigyan pa po talaga natin sila ng transportation services para lang po ma-transport sila from the workplace going to the vaccination site. And then, pangatlo po, yung siguro pagka yung sa situation na halimbawa, hindi siya pumasok, magpapabakuna siya dahil hindi siya pinapasakay. So, yun po, kung hindi po talaga siya nakapasok because of that, maaari pong maawas yon doon sa leave credits po ng ating mga kababayan or ng ating mga manggagawa.
Actually, kanina, isingit ko lang, Robby, no? Meron yung reporter namin, ang sinabi nga niya, naantala yung buong bus, no? Dahil nga sa kakapat-check ng mga card at saka ng mga ang tagal. So yung isang pasahero doon naiyak na dahil sabi niya, pangalawang araw na raw niya na late siya at natatakot siya na baka nga naman na magkaroon ng punitive action against her, no, for being tardy. Paano? I know that these are very small concerns, but on a personal level, mabigat yun. No?
Malaking bagay po talaga yan. So siguro nga, gaya po ng nabanggit ko kanina, tingnan ho natin yung mga lessons learned in the first few days of the implementation of this policy. And I'm sure naman po yung mga nag-isip po nitong polisiya na to, nasa sa isip rin naman po nila yung kapakanan, hindi lamang po in terms of health but also of the economic needs po ng ating mga manggagawa. So I'm very sure po this policy will be reviewed.
Sec, I just wanted to take a step back and to recognize kumusta ba yung labor sector ngayon. I'm just wondering if you have any surveys or any studies to show na doon sa mga nahuhuli pa sa bakuna, whether wala or kulang pa, Ano po ba ang balakid na natitira ngayon? Is it still about acceptance or is it just about access at this point?
Actually po, when we talk to employers, mga nasa 90 to 95% na po yung mga manggagawa po nila na nabakunahan po. Meron lang po talagang pailan-ilan na hindi talaga pwedeng sabay-sabay yung pagpapabakuna dahil hindi naman po din nila pwedeng iwanan. Halimbawa, yung kung nasa manufacturing, yung production line, o kaya naman po kung nasa IT, BPO sector, syempre hindi naman po lahat ay magsasabay-sabay din ng pagpapabakuna. But the employers po are looking after their workers to be inoculated po. And overall naman po, meron na tayong around 16 million of the A4 categories who have been fully vaccinated and around 18 million po yung naka-first dose na. So if you look at the totality of these vaccinated workers, they are about 75, anywhere between 75 to 85% of the working segment of the labor force. May mga pailan-ilan po na sinasabi po nila because of religion or because of their own health. But ang kailangan din po sigurong ma-dispel sa ating mga kababayan, yung pong sinasabi po nila na kapag nagpabakuna sila, magiging, sorry to say, what sinasabi nila sa probinsya to, magiging zombie sila. Yung iba naman po, meron talagang karanasan na when their family member got vaccinated, medyo lumala yung condition to the point na namatay po. So these are trauma that needs to be processed as well. Kasi ito yung pag narinig ng kapitbahay or ng kung sino man kumalat sa social media. So it's really also about educating our public about the vaccines.
Okay. Well, ma'am, pahabol ko na rin. I think what the public is also looking for is some sort of a guarantee or some sort of an assurance na, number one, the policy has been disseminated across the board to all the agencies. As you enunciated it kanina, yung policy ng DOLE. Kasi the last 2 days, hulihan talaga eh. So, this is new. We're hoping that tomorrow things will be much better and this was disseminated across the board. And number two, evenly enforced. I think that's what people are looking at for tomorrow especially. Para they know what to bring tomorrow, they know what they'll face tomorrow, and they'll know what to tell enforcers tomorrow kung sakaling magkaroon ng girian sa kalsada. So yun po, if we were to ask you po, what should workers bear in mind tomorrow pag nasa checkpoint sila? O pag hinarap sila ng konduktor o ng driver, anong dapat nilang dala? Anong dapat nilang sabihin?
Okay. Unang-una po, siguro dahil tayo ay manggagawa, automatic, lalo na kung sa formal sector, meron tayong any form of identification that's issued either by the company or by the government. So we have to bring that. Doon naman po sa mga tinatawag po natin na informal sector, syempre po, yung mga issuance po ng barangay po nila, may mga certifications po yan, o kaya meron talagang barangay ID. Tapos meron pa yung pinapayagan silang lumabas because sila ay vendor. Yung mga TODA, TODA or other association where they can be identified, dalhin po nila yon.
Mm-hmm. Okay. At basta
last na lang, kasi marami nagtatanong kahit syempre within our own companies, no? Marami po bang mga employers ang sumusunod dun sa hiling din ng DOLE na sana ay magkaroon ng paid isolation and quarantine leaves? How are we on that? Is that something that most employers are really truly considering? Or parang na lang yan, pabalat-bunga lang yan ng DOLE?
Actually, hindi naman po siya pabalat-bunga, Ma'am Lucy. In fact, yung pong labor advisory that was issued by the Secretary is just a reiteration of all the existing policies when it comes to occupational safety and health standards, general labor standards, including po yung mga IATF guidelines po. Pangalawa po, the advisory po, ang tenor po niya is just urging the companies. So, meaning that it's not mandatory. But we have to keep in mind po na may mga companies na hindi po kakayanin, halimbawa, yung mag-provide ng sarili nilang isolation facility, lalong-lalo na po yung mga maliliit na negosyo. So yung mga malalaking companies po, wala po tayong problema doon. Kasi yung through their goodwill, ito po ay naibibigay po nila sa kanilang mga manggagawa. But sad to say, not all workers are enjoying this form of benefits. Hence, we are always saying that kung sakaling umabot po tayo doon sa punto na kailangan nating mag-isolate or mag-quarantine, then we can use the existing leave credits po natin for us to be able to get paid kahit po tayo ay naka-isolate or naka-quarantine. But in the absence of leave credits po, there are other means po pwede po silang mag-apply ng sickness benefits po, halimbawa sa SSS o kaya sa GSIS. Meron din po tayong employees compensation program wherein COVID is a compensable naman po ito, sickness. So meron pong, kung hindi ako nagkakamali, mga 10,000 po yung benefits na makukuha po natin sa employees compensation po natin.
Okay. Maraming salamat for joining us tonight, ma'am. Labor Assistant Secretary, well, Undersecretary na rin po, para consistent tayo. Dominic Tutay, thank you, ma'am, for joining us tonight. Ingat po.
Salamat po.
Okay, we will just go into a break, so please stay with us. Welcome back to the Chiefs on One News, and now joining us is Dr. Beaver Tamesis, the President of the Pharmaceutical and Healthcare Association of the Philippines. Dr. Tamesis, good evening and welcome back to the Chiefs.
Good evening, yes.
Good evening, Doctor.
Good evening, sir.
Yes, sir. Sir, well, the good news is that government is now bringing in other stakeholders in distributing the booster shots, including I understand pharmacies and so on down the line. Oh, well, I'm not exactly sure. I'm not exactly sure if pharmacies are part of your association. Pero are they? Are they? Okay.
Yes.
Oh, that's good. Kasi we were talking about this a while ago. With what we have right now, parang the pharmacies don't have much space. So it's a good idea to have them assist in giving the booster shots. Pero wouldn't there be a logistical issue as well in the distribution and the vaccinations?
Thank you for inviting us to talk about this. And yes, I think it's important that we properly select the right pharmacy, the right venue, because pharmacies have different sizes, right? There are the ones that are relatively smaller, and then you have the flagship stores, which can be actually quite huge.
Yes.
And there's a lot of space available. And I think obviously they'll need to work closely with the local government and then the people in crowd control so that they can properly space out the people who may be coming in to come in for the vaccination. And yes, this has been something that the PHAP has been actually urging for quite some time now, that our drugstores and our pharmacists actually be involved in this nationwide effort to try to control the pandemic. And yes, the pharmacists have been training quite a bit actually, even before the pandemic, training in terms of upskilling themselves to be able to properly vaccinate individuals, what are the things that need to watch out for, the kinds of preparations, etc. So they are trained, they are armed with the knowledge and skills
Yeah, Doc,
So why
if
only
you don't
now?
know-
Why only
Yeah.
now? I mean, I'm just curious. Why,
Well-
why did they finally think of to do it now?
I guess it's always you don't want to always be the guy at the cutting edge. Maybe you want to see first what others are doing, and I think there's been quite a fantastic rollout in many other countries. So I guess picking up the best practices from these areas and now bringing back these best practices here locally, it's probably what happened, right? But
Yeah,
yeah,
Doc, Doc, we don't want to put you on the spot. This is genuinely coming from a lot of people welcoming this news, but also really wondering. It's one thing to not be on the cutting edge. It's another thing to implement this more than 2 years later. Di ba? And the reality kasi is, yung mga kamag-anak natin, mga kaibigan natin abroad, sinasabi siya, pupunta kaming butika meron na akong bakuna. I just walk in, walang ano. So, and you did say that, you have been working for this for quite some time already. But give us an idea lang on what complicated this journey.
I think if you look at the way the COVAX donations were structured, the IATF had to behave in a certain manner to be able to comply with the kind of demands, the prioritization, how it would be rolled out. Then, of course, there was this fear factor. This is a totally new vaccine. People have never tried this before, a new disease. Suddenly, there's new technology, and then all of this talk about how to handle the vaccines properly, right? So there were all these concerns that I think just push people to one side of the decision-making process to maybe, take a wait-and-see attitude and roll it out first, gain the experience. It's been about a year now since the first vaccines were approved for emergency use internationally. So hindi pa naman 2 years. It's just about a year.
2 years.
Doctor, do you have enough personnel if this project is expanded, and have the personnel expressed any concern, for example, about infection?
Could you say that again, please?
Do you have enough people if this program is expanded to cover more pharmacies, are there enough pharmacies to do it? And also, have they expressed any concern, for example, about infection? Because a lot of healthcare workers are getting infected, especially with Omicron.
Right. I think the pharmacies have been actually engaging training their personnel, right? They've actually been going through training courses. I think there have been several batches already, at least 8 runs already of their training courses. And these are quite a number of pharmacists actually going through training, all right, to actually learn how to do this properly, the proper techniques and all that. I think there's a difference between the outpatient setting in, say, commercial establishments or a retail pharmacy inside the mall or on the street versus the healthcare workers who are in a pressure cooker laboratory of the hospital or the emergency room, where I think the bulk of the healthcare workers who are coming down with COVID-19 have actually picked up the virus. So I think it's a difference in terms of the setting, ventilation, the number of people actually there. All these other factors, of course, come into play in determining who will potentially get infected or not.
Well, kasi if the lines for the paracetamols, during that period, very recently, when there seemed to have been a shortage, or I don't know, people were hoarding. If the lines are any indication, will we? Is there reason to imagine that the lines will be just as long for the boosters when they're made available in the pharmacies?
I guess that's why
can you handle that kind of crowd? Yeah.
I guess that's why they're rolling it out conservatively with a pilot first in the first 7 places, 5 pharmacies and I think 2 clinics, Polymed and Healthway. Then I think one store each of Generica, Mercury, Watson's, the Generics Pharmacy, and I forget the 5th one. My apologies to them. So I guess by doing a pilot, you can pick up the lessons from there, right? That's the whole point of doing a pilot. Para maaral nga nila and then they can assess. Now, obviously the queues that followed the apparent run for paracetamol, That was a bit unusual, but I think that particular situation has already begun to resolve itself, or at least because now deliveries are being made in a much more timely manner, and ordering has stepped up. So it's a two-way street, right? The delivery and the people ordering it should have come together much sooner. I guess nobody anticipated the demand that was actually going to come with the paracetamol. Now, with the demand for boosters, will it be that kind of a blockbuster? Let's see, because most people have been going to all these other centers already for getting their vaccines and their boosters, right? So this is just an additional venue. So I don't think mawawala yung mga traditional or places we've gotten used to.
Yeah.
This is just now additional.
Yeah. What about testing? I mean, other than boosters and vaccination per se, what does this model and this partnership bring by way of testing as well? And does that also give us the scale that allows testing to come down in price as well?
Well, the issue with testing is that that is a very high risk activity. High risk for the person who's testing, and also potentially the patient who's actually going to have himself tested, right? Remember, you're exposing yourself to all the secretions and the breath of that particular person you're about to test. A full regalia PPE.
Yeah.
So that requires highly trained people in well-ventilated areas. And I'm not so sure that many pharmacies would be willing to allow that to happen within their premises, or even say if the pharmacy is inside a mall, what mall would like to have suddenly potentially spreading the virus from that particular venue, right? They'd rather probably want it to be outside, open air, maybe in a some kind of a semblance of, with a curtain booth just for some semblance of privacy. So totally different. It's totally different kettle of problems versus vaccination or jab.
Yeah, that makes sense, Doc, kasi magkamali ka lang ng sundot, mapapaubo, atsing na yung ano. No, seriously, di ba?
Yes, absolutely.
Mapapaatsing yung ano, yung tao, and there goes your protocol.
Exactly, yeah. So that's an issue. So I think we need to think about the testing facility slightly differently from that of worrying about a jab versus a jab.
Doctor, how are our supplies for treating COVID? Not just COVID, but also symptoms, mild symptoms. You mentioned that paracetamol supply is normalizing. What about the others? The medicines for cough, cold, body aches, and also for treatment of COVID, molnupiravir, all these drugs. How are our supplies?
From talking with my colleagues, we know the warehouses actually have product for dealing with it. Cough and cold symptoms, fevers, body aches, etc. It's actually in the warehouse. So there needs to be that better and tighter coordination, timing of ordering and actual delivery. So I think it's not really a shortage na walang laman ng warehouse. Not like the situation that we've seen back in March, April last year, where there was absolutely no product in the country. There's absolutely no drug in the country at the time. Remdesivir. Zero. It was really zero. Now, regarding molnupiravir, from what I understand, the supply is actually fluctuating in terms of inventory levels. I think Metro Manila had a huge run this past 10 days because the sudden surge in number of cases. But I think we've seen the numbers start to come down, right? I mean, like the NCR cases on a daily basis are finally dipping. They're finally coming down. But now we're starting to see the surge in the provinces. So it actually be more concerned now, how are the delivery systems or are the inventories in the different points of supply points, how are they doing? And I don't have any visibility to that, but clearly that's something that my colleagues in these companies that are actually distributing the product, they've actually actively thinking about that, how to make sure that they can reach the provinces with their drug, particularly molnupiravir.
Does there seem to be a rising demand for medicines like molnupiravir and Paxlovid? Are you feeling that, or are you seeing that going up especially in this surge?
I can tell you the first week the first week of January, soon after we started seeing the surge, oh, there was a huge run in terms of asking for molnupiravir. I mean, like as a physician, as a friend, as a colleague, I got all sorts of calls. It just like nonstop, right? For the first 5 days or so. There's been a slowdown, but I think that might be because more and more people now know how to actually use the drug. They've gained experience with it, and they know now where to get the drug. And the hospitals, the major hospitals, actually do have supply. You just need to comply with their date documentation requirements, because these need to be reported to the FDA as part of our compassion special permit regime and the regulations that surround it. So yeah, there was a significant run. I don't know what the current movement is. I think it's still quite strong. But is it at the same levels as a week ago? I don't know. We'll have to analysis. I'm not privy to it.
That said, Dr. Tamesis, what is it about molnupiravir that you have to say the public does not necessarily understand, or what is it about these drugs that you think people have to understand first?
Well, the important thing with these drugs is that they're specific antiviral talaga. They destroy the virus. They destroy the ability of the virus to multiply within the body, which is why it's best to give within the first 5 days of symptoms. First 5 days of symptoms, that's really when the virus is rapidly multiplying inside the patient. If you can give the drug within these first 5 days and complete the course of therapy, we can cut that particular virus from progressing, the infection from progressing, and now triggering the more deadly phase of the disease, which is the excessive immune response. So these drugs must be given early, so that way we prevent the patient from going into this immune response. Yeah.
But as you noted, there is a stricter protocol for this. Is that protocol a function of supply, or is it a function of this? This is really not for everyone.
Let's put it this way: the best or the people who will most benefit are really those who are at most risk, those who have elderly, above 6 years old, many risk factors, significant lung disease, significant heart disease. These are the patients now you really do not want them to progress into the hospital, because these are the people most vulnerable for complications. Will it work in a 25-year-old person with no illnesses? Yes. The simple answer is yes. Work in terms of relief of the really severe or really bad feeling of going through COVID. It's not like just having the flu, right? The flu, a little up and down, you're okay. But this one, I mean, like, how many times have we heard people complain about the severe body aches and pains? They're totally wasted. These drugs, within 48 to 72 hours, you will see a significant change in their symptomatology. But the critical bit that was studied in these clinical trials was not this relief of symptoms, but really preventing progression into hospital. So if that's the focus, then yeah, you would tend to skew giving drug towards these particular people. But can anybody take it who is above 18 years old, who is not pregnant? Yeah, the short answer is yes.
Okay.
Doctor, we were talking about the current flood of antigen test kits, not only in Metro Manila, but really almost all over the country. Is there any move within your group to improve the distribution, to bring more reliable test kits to the public?
I'm sorry, I cannot really speak to that particular, these test kits, because that really belongs to a different group of companies who are more into devices, medical devices. But yeah, I'm sure they are paying very close attention to what's happening in terms of the demand, because we're basically dealing with the same sorts of issues, be it the manufacturing, the importation, and then the actual distribution through the different channels to actually make it widely available. And I think this move of the IATF to finally allow pharmacies to actually vaccinate at least the booster, I hope this is just the start of the movement towards democratizing access to these particular COVID therapies, be it diagnostics, be it vaccination, be it treatments. Because right now, it's not as easy, in quotation marks, to find these drugs, right? You have to go through certain hospitals who dictate certain protocols. Why can't we get it in the drugstore, like the way now we're going to get?
And the prices are so prohibitive, Doc.
Well, actually, the prices are, I think, if you have more competition, more people bringing in these products, people will start comparing. It's actually even more transparent when it's in the drugstore, right? The prices
That's
become
true.
even more transparent.
So can we expect that, for example, to get,
we're
cheaper
certainly-
Paxlovids and Molnupiravirs and all of these other treatments?
We're certainly knocking on doors, let me put it that way. And we're getting some sympathetic listening. And if programs such as yourselves or our columnists can actually raise more and more this issue, I'm sure people will pay attention and hopefully take action.
Okay. Dr. Beaver Tamesis, the President of the Pharmaceutical and Healthcare Association of the Philippines. Doc, maraming salamat for joining us tonight. Ingat po.
Thank you again.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Doc.
Doc.
Good night.
Good night po. That'll be all for this edition of the Chiefs. We hope what to discuss here will keep the conversation going. Before we go, a reminder to our viewers, mask on, wash hands, and stay safe, Philippines. I'm Ed Lingao.
I'm Ami Paminton of the Philippine Star.
I'm Lucy Cruz Valdez of News 5.
I'm Robbie Alampay, and we are One News.